Good morning, Prime Minister, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here. I am very glad to be speaking in front of this fantastic group of people, and I hope I will be able to shed some light on what I think are the two questions that I am posed with. Why are SOEs important to the Baltic States and their economy? And how can these corporations become efficient or even more efficient? My view on this is that SOEs in most countries are often not seen by most people because there is a lack of transparency, and they often work slightly in the dark, but nevertheless, they often constitute a very important part of the economy, basic infrastructures. They set the prices. They have a huge financial impact. They can make a country more attractive for FDIs. They can make export more attractive internationally. In short, SOEs in many countries, which I think is the case also in the Baltic States, are very important to the economy. It is also, in most cases, which I understand is correct even in the Baltic States, a very large employer. So it means a lot to many people, which is why it is also a very sensitive political issue. And that leads to, in my view, why it is important that such companies has absolutely the best corporate governance, because they have an ability to take leadership in so many roles, from transparency to actual how an industry or a sector can be led, and therefore help the country into more prosperity. It is also very important, and this is not the least in case in the Baltic States, that the SOEs have an opportunity to be leaders for creating a more deeper capital markets, both on the bond side and on the equity side. Now, the difference between government-owned companies and privately held companies is fundamentally one, and that is private sector companies have only one objective, and that is to make money, if I express myself rudely, while government companies have often multiple objectives. And this is, in my view, where the problem lies. So the whole issue of how do you make these companies more efficient lies really in the ability to separate the commercial objectives from the policy objectives. And this is a little bit like my favorite story, Alice in Wonderland, comes to a fork in the road and asks the rabbit, which road should I take? And the rabbit says, where do you want to go? And Alice says, I don't know. Well, if you don't know where you want to go, it doesn't matter which road you take. And this is very typical and very classical for me. And it's like, I usually use the example of a military troop. If you ask a platoon to go both left and right, what do you think will happen? They will stand still, because they know they're damned if they go left, they're damned if they go right. So in order to avoid any criticism, they just stand still. And this is, in my view, the root of the problem. So what I'm going to talk about is very much on how to separate these two issues, how to create tools that will help. And one of my favorite is what I've called 3 principles of success on managing SOEs, which is really clear objective, which you by now should become very easy to understand. But the other one is political insulation, and I don't want politicians or government officials to be offended here. It is just that these are 2 different issues. And the third is transparency, which is really the map. And I would like to explain this. It's like tightening the wheel of a bike, if you like, with only 3 spokes. You can't just tighten one. You have to tighten all 3 over and over again until you find the balance. I do this myself sometimes, and I often fail, because it is an art, really, to do it equally well on each 3 spokes. But that is what we're trying to do, and I will show you a few ideas on how I think this can be done. So the fundamental for this, in order to make a decision, in order to be able to separate policy issues from commercial issues, it is, like Pekka was saying, we have to, it can only be those companies that work in a competitive sector. Because only if you're working in a competitive sector, you have a reason to really maximize profit. And then that is when the conflict with policy objectives arise. So behind everything are very brave and very important political decisions. What sectors do we need to deregulate? Where in the evolution of deregulation are we? And where do we want to go? And there is different steps you can separate. You can start with deregulation, you can separate infrastructure from operation, etc. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Another very important issue, which is really, you could place, I often have a debate about this, whether it's political insulation or not, but I think it fits under all 3 of the spokes that I've been talking about, and that is the ownership function. It is a fantastically useful tool, and it could almost make or break your reforms. Because at the heart of inefficient governance for state-owned enterprise lies this issue of fragmentation, which comes from that various companies lie under the line ministries. And there's nothing, it's just a fundamental issue. It's very difficult for a line ministry to be both the basketball player, so to speak, and the referee in a game. And quite frankly, I mean, if you are deregulating a sector and then inviting them to a basketball game, if we're using that metaphor, I would hesitate to play a game with somebody whose family are both the referees and the coach and the players. You know that game is not going to end well. You know you're going to lose. So you're not going to get much competition. So we're back to the roots again. If you believe competition can help your country to lower costs, to create more multiple services in that industry, you have to play the game fair. You have to have a level playing field. It's not very difficult. But everything I'm talking about, I can always answer any question coming back to, do you really want competition? You have decided on deregulation, then you have to play it fair. Then you can't be the basketball coach or the basketball player and the referee at the same time. Governance structure is something you're going to talk about a lot, and I can just say that there's many examples, and I believe that your neighboring countries in Sweden and Finland have very good governance structures. Finland has a very good ownership function, which I think is a good first start. I will explain why I think the ownership function is such an important issue. If we then, let's just go back to what the different models are. Internationally, there are 3 models, in my view. It is the one that historically was the most popular one, which is the decentralized one, which is every line ministry has their own SOE or GOE. And then there was a progression from this in the 70s or whatever. It's different all over the world. It was centralized under one ministry. There was an additional the Ministry of Economy or Ministry of Finance was added as a backpack to the line ministry to tell them, no, you need to be more efficient, you need to think about the finances a little bit more, etc. So there were two drivers in one car, which is not very good, in my view. The third model is the centralized version. And again, we're talking about centralizing only the companies that are working or are decided for the future to work in a deregulated sector. And then you have, this is probably where the consensus among best practice or governments internationally are today. It's hugely contested. It makes nobody happy, but it works. I can promise you that. And there is then a line of progression on the ownership function in that model, which is either you put it in a separate ministry, which I think Finland has done the best of those. There are French, there are Belgians, there are several, even the New Zealanders have a call it a separate, but I must say the Finnish way to do that is the best. And then you have the next progression, line of progression, is you put it into an authority, which means you are slightly more politically insulated. And the third version, or the most developed one, is when you have it in a holding company. And in my view, the best version of that is the Singaporean. Malaysia, I would even say, ADIA and all these people, because it has a little bit more insulation than many other countries that are trying this model. But it's a long, not everybody takes this in one step. It could be a progression. Well, the reason, just a few words on the implementation. The reason you want to create this level playing field is simple, so that you really get competition. So private sector entrepreneurs feel that they really want to get into this sector, and thereby you're lowering the prices, the consumers, the voters get a better deal. Also, international people find it more interesting to invest, and you're able to export, etc. It becomes a very, very good circle. Creating a clear objective is also very important. And making it, visualizing it. And there I learned a very good story. It's from a gentleman in the audience here today, which is from your own basketball coach, a previous basketball coach in this country, who said, good coaching is not about buying or getting the best players in the world. It's making the best of what you have. And this is really, really important. And this is, for me, one of the fundamental ideas with clear objective. If you're able to tell your team and show them and visualize what is it you really want to achieve, and they can feel it's possible. If you're telling them to go both left and right, they feel helpless, hopeless, and they are not energized. But if you give them something that is tangible, they will be fantastic. I can almost promise you that your companies, if you just make these simple changes, will make great achievements. And this you do by having valuation, all kinds of tricks with dividends, and whatever the private sector has invented for hundreds of years. But also you need a good map. And this is very important. People also, if you can imagine your basketball team, the whole league of basketball, playing every Sunday, very important games, but it was forbidden to transmit the results. Do you think they would be motivated? Nobody would know what team to cheer for or whatever.